Welcome! I'm Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon. Over there, published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today we will be reviewing The Dark Half by Stephen King. I'm reviewing every Stephen King novel in publication order. We are to The Dark Half, published in 1989 by Stephen King. So we're about a third of the way through the Stephen King books now. Now, if you've been following these reviews, you also know that in the last, in most of the reviews, these Stephen King reviews are haunted. Like, weird stuff happens in these reviews. Things fall over. It's weird stuff, and I can't explain it. Now, when I rewatched on YouTube my review of The Drawing of the Three, I noticed I have these Motley Crue Funko Pops. I noticed the Vince Neil Funko Pop was doing some weird shit. All on his own, just doing weird fucking shit, and I couldn't figure it out. So, you'll notice Vince Neil's no longer here. He got kicked out of the band. I can't have him in here fucking with my videos. So Vince Neil got kicked out of Motley Crue. He's kicked out of the videos for good. He is no longer welcome. Let's get to The Dark Half. I love The Dark Half. You know, there's some stuff in The Dark Half. This is my paperback. I've got the hardcovers and paperbacks. I also listen to the audible.com versions of every book that I review, as far as the Stephen Kings go. Now, the audible.com version was done by a voice actor named Grover Gardner. He has done several of the Stephen King books. He does a great job. Can't complain about the work Grover Gardner does on Audible. Again, with the production, though, weird music layered over the top of the Audible narration. I don't know why the producers of Audible books do that, but it sucks. Stop doing it. You can't hear the story when you got music playing over the narration. I hate it. Knock that shit off. So anyway, let's talk about The Dark Half, a haunting book. Now, as you know, Stephen King starts out a lot of his books. A lot of his protagonists are actually writers themselves. Like, a lot of his protagonists are writers themselves, and our main protagonist is Thad Beaumont. We start out the story with Thad Beaumont as a kid, and he's just a child, and he's got a tumor in his head. A lot of Stephen King's protagonists have tumors in their head. Well, this one, Thad Beaumont, has a tumor in his head, and they go to get the tumor out, and it is one of the creepiest opening scenes in any Stephen King novel at all. I'm going to get rid of this bookmark because it's driving me nuts. But the Stephen King novels, they've got a writer as a protagonist. He's a little kid. He's got a tumor, and the character and the doctor opens up his brain to get the tumor out. And the weirdest thing is he opens up the brain, and it's one of the creepiest Stephen King openings ever. There's an eyeball inside the brain and teeth inside the little kid's brain, and it makes no sense. Like, what is going on? I mean, and then we start to learn about what parasitic twins are, or in utero cannibalism, where a twin is in the womb of the mother, twins, and one twin eats. This is a real phenomenon. This is real science, folks. This really happens. The stronger twin eats the other twin. And it ends up as like weird tumors in your body. And so I was not aware of this. I think in the Greek Wedding, the movie The Greek Wedding, I don't think that's the title of it. They talk about it a little bit. It's a funny scene. But then in The Dark Half, we open with the scene of the twin cannibalizing the other twin and opening up in the brain and seeing the eyeball blinking inside the brain. It's real gross. Anyway, that's Thad Beaumont's youth. Cut to when he's an older person and he's a famous writer. He's written a really great literary book. And, it doesn't make a lot of money, so he decides to get this pseudonym named George Stark, much like Stephen King does. Stephen King has a pseudonym, Richard Bachman. So this is kind of taken from Stephen King's old life, where there's where he comes up with a pseudonym. Thad Beaumont comes up with the pseudonym Richard Stark. Or no, it's George Stark. Why do I call him Richard Stark? I don't know. It's George Stark. It's the pseudonym. And George Stark writes some books and they become super popular. Super, super popular. And then we learn that, Thad Beaumont's not that thrilled about it, so he wants to put George Stark to bed. He wants to end the career of George Stark. People start finding out that he's the same, that George Stark is actually this real literary guy, and he's writing these books to make money under the George Stark name. So he just wants to end the whole experiment. He wants to put George Stark to bed. So he has like a photographer come to his hometown, and they do this like fake funeral where they put a grave marker for George Stark, and they lay him to rest. The pseudonym is done. No more books under the George Stark name. We're going to end it. I'm going to start just writing under Thad Beaumont. It's kind of like this production. Well, what happens is they make the graveyard. They have the funny little ceremony. Well, in the night, George Stark claws his way out of the grave. He claws his way. Like, it's a pseudonym. It's not even a real person. It's not even a real person, but yet something claws its way out of that grave and starts wreaking havoc and becoming a serial killer. And just doing stuff, just weird stuff. Weird stuff. And the creepy thing is, and I love this about Stephen King. Thad Beaumont, remember, the parasitic twin uterocannibalism. Well, Thad Beaumont in real life has twins. It's just weird. Now he's parasitically cannibalized his own twin as a baby, and now he's created a twin writer for himself, a pseudonym, and he's killed that twin again with this fake grave, and then the twin again claws its way out of the grave. So there's a lot of parallels and a lot of creepy parallels in this. And of course, George Stark, the twin that claws himself out of the grave, he's got like a mental link with Thad Beaumont. And there's a lot of murders that start happening. As a serial killer. George Stark is a serial killer. So that's the thrust of the plot. That's the main plot. I will not give anything else away about the plot other than that, because you need to read it and figure out all the twists and turnies and things like that. Because the sparrows are flying again. The sparrows are flying again. It's creepy. One of his creepier books, one of his better books, one of his best police procedural books, because there is a police investigation in this book. And we are introduced to Alan Pangborn, one of my favorite Stephen King characters. This is the first book where Alan Pangborn shows up, and he's also in Sundogs, I think, and Needful Things. But he's a great character. He's a police officer. He investigates a lot of the weird supernatural crap that goes on in Stephen King books. I love it. I love the Alan Pangborn stuff. He's probably my favorite Stephen King character of all time. I just like it. I mean, I worked in law enforcement, and so I know what. I kind of get it. I get it. So that's the basic thrust of the novel. I think it's one of his better, more creepier novels. I think it's a good police procedural novel. I think it's a good murder mystery. I think it's a good serial killer novel. And I think it's just got some creepy stuff, from the eyeball and the brain, the teeth in the brain, the parasitic twin cannibalization, the in utero the cannibalization. It's just got some weird stuff in it. It's haunting. I loved every bit of this novel. I can't recommend it enough. And there's a part of it, and this is why people love Stephen King. Early in the book, there's a part about a product, a toy you can buy called Yo Mama, where Yo Mama is actually your wife's mother, your mother-in-law. It's a doll that's your mother-in-law, and she spits insults at you. And rather than pulling a string on her back to get her to talk, you just kick her across the room and she starts spitting insults at you. That's the kind of stuff that Stephen King, the little extra paragraphs and weird things in Stephen King books that just make a Stephen King book great. I love The Dark Half. I am going to give The Dark Half one of my higher ratings because it's one of my favorite books. And I would say 9, I almost want to give it a 10. But there's only a handful of Stephen King books that get a 10 for me. I am going to give this a 9.5 out of 10. It's that good. It's one of my favorites. I loved The Dark Half. And as you know, every book I write is dedicated to Stephen King, Motley Crue, and the Oakland Raiders. That's why I have these things here. Every book I write, because they were the 3 most important things when I was a kid. And when I was a kid, the Motley Crue and the Oakland Raiders, I worshipped everything about them, and I read every Stephen King book I could get, because the Motley Crue, Stephen King, and the Oakland Raiders were the most awesome things ever. They get a shout out in every book I write. That's why I have these things in the background. So, Stephen King, Motley Crue, and the Oakland Raiders, they get a shout out. 9 out of 10. The Dark Half. One of my favorite Stephen King books.